think that it really depends on what that person did and how it affected other people. Because if you steal a little can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup from the supermarket, then I mean, there are more soup cans in the world. It's not a tragedy. But if you take someone's life or you do something that hurts them emotionally, then that leaves an impact that can't be fixed.
I believe that if a criminal can actually repay in order to fix the problem, such as, paying for a building to be cleaned off if they'd vandalized or cleaning it themselves, or replacing stolen items that they may have thieved. But if they can't repay it with money or with service, such as murder or kidnapping or raping, those things cannot be repaid. You've broken someone's spirit, in many cases taken someone's life, and that can't be repaid with money or any act of kindness, and should not be able to repay their debt to society.
I think that yes, a criminal can pay his or her debt to society based on the crime and if the person is truly sorry. If it was a very serious crime like a murder, then I think it's hard to pay your debt. And if it was like a smaller crime, then I think it's easier because you can easily do community service, do your time in jail, and get out and be fully repaid. Otherwise, I think it's a little bit harder.
I think it depends on the crime. I think there are some things that you can repay. If you stole something, you can do retribution. You can pay them back. You can do some kind of community service. I think if it's murder or capital crimes, then I don't think you can. I think they should spend their life in prison if we don't have the death penalty.
To society, yes. To the people that they probably initially wronged, probably not. It's kind of a difficult question to answer just because depending on the crime, so if you're talking about tax evasion, pretty simple, you're paying back the government, so not a huge issue, but something like murder, more heinous crimes like that, I'm sure it depends on the community that they came from. I guess looking at the social norms, if they come from a community where that's normal, murders happen, rapes happen, things like that happen very often, I'm sure it's just kind of a natural thing for people to go to jail and for them to feel like they've done what they needed to do. If we're talking maybe a place like Highlands Ranch and there's a murder that happens there, I'm sure it would take a long time for that person to be able to repay that sort of social debt back to that community. So I'm sure it depends on how they do it, on how public it is, and if they keep up with it. I know a lot of people that will, reoffend, I guess you could say. So, things like a registered pedophile could possibly reoffend, even though they've gone through the right jail time and recovery and all this kind of stuff. I'm sure they can reoffend because that's something that's kind of innate in them, but I'm sure they can repay to society if it was something that's societal acceptance, I guess.
Well, it all depends on what they've done. If they've done something like killed a person, then no, because that's taking someone's life. But if you stole from a store, okay, you can obviously pay it back in.
Depends on the crime. I feel like if a person is murdered, you can never get that person's life back, so in that aspect you can't really repay it. But if it's like a petty crime like stealing or like robbery, I feel like eventually a person can be reformed and repay their debt to society.
Yes, I do think that it's possible for a criminal to repay his debt to society, and I think it's important to think that people can make mistakes and own up to them and acknowledge them and do what they can to fix it. And it's hard to imagine that somebody who committed a serious crime like murder would ever be fully able to say that they repaid their debt or they were sorry enough.
A criminal can make restitution or serve time and somewhat, repay the debt to society, but always, and depending on the severity of the crime, there'll be some person who is forever changed, and no matter how much time served or monetary damages are paid, that person will forever have a lack of trust or some kind of psychological issue, again, depending on the type of loss or type of crime committed. So yes, there are ways that the criminal can make repayments to society, but again, there's always some sort of permanent loss for an individual or a small group of individuals who the crime was perpetrated against.
I personally don't feel that Peary has repaid his debt to society. While he did serve a long prison sentence, and that was a good punishment for him, because he had time to look over his life and figure out what he needed to do to be better when he got out of prison, he didn't really do anything to repay the society as a whole for his crimes. He did spend time away from them, but that doesn't really help them a lot. And since his crime took place in a setting that had a lot of people in it who probably had no idea how to deal with what they saw, it would have caused a lot of emotional damage and obviously physical damage to the person that he shot. And so, since emotional damage is so much harder to repair than physical damages, it's really not something that can be resolved by spending time in a prison and then coming out and saying, oh, I'm really sorry for what I did and I'm not going to do it anymore. That's all great, and it's a really good thing since you're not going to be doing it anymore, but the fact remains that you did it at one point and that these people are still affected by it, even if they weren't physically hurt or really even emotionally. They were still there and it's still with them, and it's going to take a while to really get that to be resolved, if it can be resolved. And I think that to have repaid his debt to society, he needs to do more to atone for it, other than just staying away. It's like putting someone in timeout for breaking a glass and leaving the glass on the floor. Because if you leave the glass on the floor, someone else is going to step on it, and the glass is going to stay in their foot, and it's still going to hurt for a while later until you get that person to clean up the glass. So sitting in timeout doesn't necessarily clean up the whole thing.
Earlier, when answering the question, can a criminal truly pay his or her debt to society, I said that a criminal can if the crime is a smaller crime and if they're sorry. I still believe that you should be sorry, and I still believe that it's harder to pay your debt when it's a harder or a bigger crime, but I think that really depends on what the people that a criminal hurt, like what they think. I think that you can pay your debt to society easily, but if you can pay back the people that you hurt, I think that's a lot different, and I think it's harder. So can a criminal truly pay his or her debt to society? Yes. To the people they've hurt, not so sure.
Did Peary Thomas ever repay his debt to society? I believe that although he did hurt someone and he did commit a felony, he didn't kill anyone, and it was an accident. So although maybe I agree that he did repay his debt to society, and although that goes against what I've said previously, I think that in some ways he has helped more than he's harmed in his in his role as a human. In his community, he has done more good and opened up more people to the problems with the ghetto, which in turn could very well prevent more gang violence than he himself actually caused. So I think that Pierre Thomas did repay his debt to society.